wind came low across the flat earth, dragging its breath through yellow dust and brittle weeds. It rattled the slats of an old goat shed like bones in a gambler's cup. She sat tied to the post beside it, legs folded under her, hands bound at the wrist with a sun-bleached length of rope, shoulders drooped like someone who hadn't had a full breath in days. Her dress was the color of clay, and just as cracked. The hem clung to the dirt, frayed and stiff from wind and waiting. A goat blinked at her from a few feet away. Then it went back to chewing on a dry root, like nothing in the world had changed. The town behind her was dead quiet. Just two buildings left standing, and one of them slouched. A sign above the door flapped in the wind, letters peeled and half missing. Decker's S_PPLIS. No one came in. No one went out. If anyone lived in the back rooms, they hadn't shown their face all day. Her hair, once the color of corn silk, was knotted at her neck and stuck with grit. Flies buzzed, lazy and cruel. Still, she didn't swat them. She didn't twitch. She stared across the flat nothingness with a look that had gone past fear, past hope, and straight into something colder. A nail stuck out from the post near her shoulder. Once, she tried to reach it. That was 2 mornings ago. The rope had bitten deeper, and the nail never moved. Now she didn't try. Then hooves. She didn't lift her head at first. Thought it might be the wind playing games again. But the rhythm held steady. For legs. Heavy. Coming slow. The goat looked up. She followed its gaze. There, far down the road where the dirt met the heat haze, a rider. One shape. Alone. No hurry in him. Just coming, like he was always meant to. Dust coiled around the horse's steps, rising in lazy curls. The sun behind him made his figure a shadow, stretched tall and strange. No sound but the creak of leather and the soft clink of his saddle. He didn't stop at the edge of town. Just kept coming. She turned her face away. Another man. Another offer. Another hand out, only to push her farther down. She kept her mouth shut. The hooves stopped a few feet from where she sat. She didn't look up. Long silence. Then a sound. The rustle of him dismounting, boots settling into the dirt. A faint click as his spurs brushed each other. Then nothing. The man stood still for a long while, letting the wind speak. Finally, he took off his hat. "I heard this place had goats," he said. His voice was dry as bark but soft in its corners, like he didn't speak often and didn't need to. She didn't answer, just looked down at the knot in the rope and the dust caking her fingers. The man crouched, not too close, just enough to be out of shadow. "You got a name?" She raised her head just a touch. Eyes cracked open, 2 green flecks in a weathered face. She looked at him like she was counting seconds. "I had one," she said, voice no louder than a prayer. The man nodded, like that was the right answer. He didn't untie her yet. Just looked past her at the goat shed, at the collapsed fence, at the dry water bucket tipped in the dirt. "This place don't look like it's kept its promises," he said. A flicker, barely visible, passed through her. She blinked once. "They said it was temporary," she murmured. "Just until someone came for me." "Did they say who?" She gave the smallest shake of her head. The man stood. His shadow moved over her for a second before the sun pulled it back again. "Seems to me," he said, "you already did your waiting." She didn't move. He stepped forward and reached slowly for the knot. His fingers were steady. Rough hands, scarred at the knuckles, dirt under the nails, like he knew work and didn't mind it. The rope gave way with a tug. She pulled her arms to her chest, wincing. He offered a canteen without a word. She took it, drank too fast, then coughed and wiped her mouth on her sleeve. The man turned and looked back down the road. The wind picked up again, tugging at his coat, sending dust along the wooden bones of the town. "You got anywhere to go?" he asked. She stared at the horizon. "No." "Well then," he said, placing his hat back on his head and looking down at her. "You'll live like a queen." She blinked. That was it. No explanation. No bargain. Just that sentence. He walked to his horse and unstrapped a blanket roll, set it gently beside her, reached into his saddlebag and brought out a heel of bread and a dried apple. The goat bleated. He glanced at it. "You want the goat?" She stared. He whistled once, and the goat trotted after him as he led the horse toward the supply store. She watched him knock once on the warped door. Waited. No one came. He turned back toward her. "You stand." She nodded slowly. He didn't offer to lift her. Just waited. After a moment, she rose to her feet. Shaky, thin, sunburnt, but standing. The hat shaded his face, but she could tell he was watching her closely. He held out a hand. She looked at it. Then she reached out, hesitant at first, then firm, and placed hers in it. They walked together toward the horse, dust kicking up around their boots. As they passed the goat's shed, she didn't look back. Didn't need to. Behind her, the wind rustled the empty rope. The post leaned a little farther toward the dirt. The goat followed behind, tail flicking, and the sound of hooves faded into the desert, carrying a woman who'd been left to rot and a man who didn't leave things that way. The next morning, they rode without speaking. The man, he still hadn't given a name, kept a pace that didn't tire her, but didn't wait for her either. Clara sat side-saddle on the pack mule he'd bought for 2 coins, and half a smile from a traveling peddler. The goat trotted along like it belonged. They passed hills that looked carved by wind and time, where vultures circled lazily and cacti split the earth like stubborn survivors. By midday, the sun was a hammer. Clara's cheeks burned, but she didn't complain. The silence between them wasn't empty. It was full, heavy, like they were both chewing something too thick to spit out yet. At the edge of a dry creek, they stopped. He unsaddled the horse and led it to a shade patch beneath the leaning mesquite. Clara sat on a rock and watched him pull a small knife and start whittling at a piece of wood. "You carve?" he asked, not looking up. She shook her head. "Used to stitch, when I had something worth mending." He nodded once and passed her a smaller branch. "Try anyway." She held the blade like it might cut through more than wood. Her hand still bore rope marks, thin, red lines like silent accusations. He went back to his carving. They stayed like that until the sun tilted low. Then he spoke. "You were at Decker's place." She stiffened. "He sold girls once, before the sheriff went missing." She didn't answer. He didn't press. But her silence told more than words would have. The town they reached that evening didn't have a name on the sign. Just welcome burned into a plank so sun-faded it looked like a threat. 24 buildings leaned against each other like they were afraid to fall alone. Children stared through cracks in the shutters. A dog barked once, then whimpered off. They stabled the horse and mule beside the only boarding house. The keeper, a sharp-eyed woman with a crooked spine, didn't smile when she saw Clara, just jerked her head toward the upstairs room. "1 bed. Don't bring no trouble in." The man handed over 3 coins. "We'll be gone by morning." Inside the room, the floor sloped downhill. A crack ran across the ceiling like lightning frozen in plaster. Clara stood near the window, hands clenched around her elbows. "You don't have to sleep in here," she said quietly. He looked at her. "I'll take the chair," he replied. She nodded once. Didn't argue. That night, neither of them slept much. By the 3rd day, the quiet between them had taken root. He taught her how to hold a rifle. "Like it's heavy but yours," he said, placing it into her arms. "Don't aim unless you mean it." They practiced behind the barn. She hit the first can, missed the next 3, then stopped flinching. She never smiled. Not really. But her shoulders shifted higher. That night, while he cleaned the rifle, she stood at the window and watched dust roll in from the north. "You got people?" she asked, after a long silence. "No. You ever did?" He looked up. "Too many. Trouble came on a Wednesday. It wore boots with silver tips and a hat sharp enough to cut. He walked into the saloon like the floor owed him a bow. The man behind the bar stiffened, wiped his hands on his apron, poured without being asked. Clara saw it from across the street. She froze. He stepped out of the shadows like he hadn't aged a day. The same grin, the same coat, the same eyes that had once told her she was worth her weight in gold, then tried to trade her for a wagon axle and a sack of grain. She turned and walked back to the boarding house, slow and steady, not running, but her hands wouldn't stop shaking. He noticed. The man who'd freed her from the goat shed watched her drop the tin cup twice that night. She didn't explain, and he didn't ask. But when she woke up the next morning, the rifle was leaned beside the window. Cleaned, loaded, ready. The saloon grew louder that evening. Voices slurred around her name. Swear she was Decker's girl. Had a scar around her wrists. Reckon she's worth something. Saw a poster once. Heard she ran. Stole silver. Or a horse. Or some fella's pride. They didn't know she was listening. But he did. He stepped into the saloon just after sundown. The door creaked open and everything went still. He didn't say a word. Just walked up to the bar, placed 2 bullets on the counter, and nodded to the bartender. Whiskey. The silver-booted man turned. Eyes flicked to the bullets, then to the scar across the stranger's hand. Recognition bloomed slow and bitter. Well, I'll be damned, he said. Didn't think you'd crawl back from whatever hole you buried yourself in. The stranger drank. Didn't look at him. Still talking, huh? He murmured. Guess some dogs never stop barking. The saloon didn't breathe. Clara watched from the corner window upstairs. She didn't know what they were saying, but she felt it in her chest, like the air was thickening, like something in her blood had started to ache. She grabbed the rifle. Later, she would remember the way the goat outside the stable stopped chewing, the way the horses went quiet, how the wind didn't move for a full 10 seconds. Then boots on wood. Fast. Heavy. She opened the door in time to see the stranger backing out of the saloon, hand hovering near his belt, eyes never leaving the man who followed. Not drawn yet, but close. Too close. Clara stood at the top of the steps, watching. Someone behind her whispered, "Don't get involved." She raised the rifle. Didn't point it. Not yet. Just held it. Like it was hers. He saw her then. Looked up just for a second. And nodded. Like it was all falling into place. The silver-booted man turned, saw her, froze. He laughed once, bitter and sharp. Well, well, he said. Little Clara's grown claws. But I remember when you couldn't even. The hammer cocked. Her finger stayed steady. You don't remember nothing worth keeping, she said. The man looked back and forth between them, weighed his chances, then spit, stepped back, and muttered, Ain't worth it. He walked away. The saloon door flapped once. Then stillness. Later, she sat on the steps, rifle across her knees. He sat beside her. Neither of them spoke. The wind picked up again. Smelled like smoke and rain. She looked west, where the clouds were piling. Something's coming, she said. He nodded once. Yeah, he said. Storm's close now. The sun came late to this place. It hung behind the cliffs, like it was thinking twice about showing its face. The town stretched beneath it, empty, quiet, tilted like a forgotten chessboard waiting on a move that never came. No bell rang in the morning. No hymns. No steeple. Just the long groan of wood, the flapping of laundry left too long in the wind, and the echo of someone's cough behind shuttered windows. The sign at the town's edge was newer than most things, fresh nails, but no name. Just 3 words carved deep, and oh, God's here. They'd come on the 5th day of writing. The man had said nothing when they passed the burned-out chapel on the hill. Clara only stared. She didn't ask what had happened, and he didn't offer. Instead, they found lodging in a lean-to built behind a grain warehouse. The old man who offered it squinted at them through one milky eye. You're passing through, he asked. We're staying long enough to matter, the stranger said. The old man muttered something about dust and devils, but took the coins anyway. That night, thunder rolled. Dry lightning stitched the far sky. The air smelled like rust and secrets. Clara sat on a wooden crate, oil lamp flickering beside her. She was writing. Not words, just shapes. Loops, marks. Anything to keep her hands busy. The stranger smoked a hand rolled near the doorway, hat low over his face. You ever miss it? She asked quietly. Miss what? Peace. He didn't answer. Just tapped ash into the dirt. I used to pray, she said, before they locked me up behind that shed. I prayed every night, out loud. She smiled then, small and bitter. I think God got tired of hearing me. He didn't look at her, but he said, Maybe he's just waiting to hear what you say next. By morning, the town had changed. 3 new horses at the hitch post. One of them wore the mark of the Iron Star gang, burned into the flank like a brand. Clara spotted it first. She stepped back into the shadows of the alley and found him already waiting there. He saw the look in her eyes. "How many?" he asked. "3 now. More'll come." He nodded once. "Time to go." She shook her head. "They'll follow. They always follow." That wasn't fear in her voice. It was something else. Resolve. Or maybe defiance. She laid a hand on the rifle strapped to her back. "Then maybe it's time we stop running." They watched from the rooftop of the general store. 2 of the Iron Star riders lounged near the well. One sat with a boot propped against the trough, flipping a coin. The third, bigger than the others, wandered the street, kicking at stones like he owned the dirt. No one in town made eye contact. Clara loaded slow, precise. The stranger counted bullets like they were prayers. Then, behind them, "You two planning a war." They turned. It was the old man, the one with the blind eye, standing with a cracked teacup, shaking just a little. The stranger gave him a look. "Planning's done," he said. The old man stared at Clara, then the rifle, then back again. "You don't look like the one to start trouble." She answered with a single word, "Ain't starting." The ambush came at dusk. They'd expected the 3. They didn't expect 7. They came silent down the canyon pass, faces covered, guns drawn, moving like wolves. The first shot rang out before the birds even lifted from the trees. Clara was behind the barn when it hit. She spun, saw the flash, dropped to her knees, and crawled through dry brush, every breath loud in her own ears. She found him crouched behind a wagon, firing clean and calm. "You all right?" he asked without looking. "Close," she breathed. "Closer than they should be." The firefight tore open the stillness. Clara returned fire. 2 quick shots. One man went down with a shout. The stranger moved like a shadow, always a step ahead. Clara watched him drop one, then another. But the others kept coming. Someone shouted her name. Not the name she used now. The one she'd left behind. It froze her. Long enough for the shot to catch her shoulder. She hit the ground hard. Dirt in her mouth. Blood, not much, but hot and fast. She tried to rise. Her arm failed. Then, Boots, the big one, Iron Star crest on his belt, smiling like a dog that caught a scent. He stepped over her rifle. "This the queen," he sneered. "Ain't much of a throne." She didn't answer, didn't blink. Behind him, the stranger. No words, just steel and fury. The man went down with a grunt. Not dead. But Clara didn't wait. She rolled, grabbed the rifle with her good arm, and swung it toward the next shadow, moving through the dust. Later, the wind carried the smoke away. The town didn't speak for a long time. Bodies were gathered, fires doused, horses spooked and calmed. Clara sat on the warehouse steps, one arm wrapped in torn cloth, eyes half shut. The stranger stood beside her, silent, bloody. He didn't look at the sky. He looked at the church that wasn't there. Just charred beams, ash, and silence. Clara followed his gaze. "Did you know this place?" she asked. A long pause. "I knew the man who built that steeple." She nodded, then said nothing else. The townsfolk gathered slowly. Men with old rifles, women with sharper eyes, children watching from behind legs and doors. The old man stepped forward. "You brought the fight," he said. "No," Clara replied, before the stranger could. "They followed me." A long silence. Then, "You stayed." That landed heavier than any bullet. The stranger met the old man's gaze. "We'll be gone by morning." The old man shook his head. "Maybe don't." That night, Clara stood in front of the chapel ruins. The moon was high. The wind had gone quiet. She knelt there for a long time, staring at the scorched stone. He approached but didn't speak. She turned toward him, slowly. "I buried something here once," she said. "What was it?" She looked down at her feet, then back up. "Hope." He didn't reply. Didn't need to. They stood there in silence. And somewhere, in the dark that hadn't lifted in years, something shifted. Not a miracle. Not yet. But something close. They buried the dead at the canyon's mouth. No crosses, no headstones, just shallow mounds and a row of smooth stones, each with a name scratched into it by the blade of a boot knife. Most weren't real names, just the ones people remembered or whispered. Hat with red feather. Boy with shotgun. Silver-booted one. Clara carved her slower. Not for an enemy. For the old woman from the boarding house, shot through her door when she refused to open it for the Iron Star men. Clara pressed the blade deep into the rock and wrote. Didn't back down. The canyon cut behind the town like a scar. Sheer cliffs of red, wind-chiseled and silent. The townsfolk called it the Canyon of Names because of the old stories, travelers who vanished into it, names lost to the wind, carved in memory alone. Now there were more names. The stranger stood at the edge, hat in his hands, dust on his coat, blood still crusted along one sleeve. He hadn't said much since the shootout. He didn't need to. His silence told what the words wouldn't carry. Clara stood beside him, arm in a sling, hair tangled, dirt streaked down her cheek. Below, the wind moved like a whisper. They stayed longer than planned. A week passed. Then another. Clara helped patch windows. She split kindling one-handed, taught a boy to aim with a slingshot, and sat beside a mother who couldn't stop crying for the husband she'd lost. No one asked where she came from anymore. No one needed to. The stranger spent his time riding the perimeter of the town each morning and each evening. Never said why. Just rode, always scanning the horizon. One night she asked him, "Do you think more will come?" He didn't look at her when he answered, "Yes." The cost showed up in quiet ways, in the way people flinched at a loud boot step, in how no one touched a pistol unless it was necessary, in how the children stopped playing near the canyon. The land had changed too. A long line of hoof prints scarred the east ridge. Coyotes had gone silent. Even the wind had a new sound, lower, more cautious. Clara noticed it most in herself. She didn't cry when her shoulder ached, didn't smile when the children asked her to tell stories. She barely spoke unless it mattered. But at night she carved. Names. Not of the dead. Of the ones she'd once been. Clara from the orchard. Clara who wore blue. Clara who waited for someone that never came. Each night a new one. Each night, she let one more version of herself go. One afternoon, she followed the stranger into the canyon. He didn't ask her to. She didn't ask permission. They walked in silence, the sound of gravel under boots the only language between them. The canyon narrowed the deeper they went, like the world was tightening its grip. After an hour, they reached an old campfire ring, blackened stones, half buried in dust. He knelt by it, ran his fingers along the ashes. "This is where I lost them," he said quietly. Clara didn't ask who, but he answered anyway. 3 riders, one barely 16. We were escorting a wagon east. They followed us through this canyon. I stayed behind to hold them off. He picked up a fragment of burned wood. When I came out, the wagon was gone. So were the others. I think maybe I wasn't supposed to make it. She looked at him, something flickering behind her eyes. "Why'd you come back?" He stood, wiped his hands clean on his coat. "Because there's still people who won't get a name unless someone stays." That night, a vote was held. The town gathered in the remains of the saloon, now missing half a wall and most of its liquor. Oil lamps lit the corners. Eyes flicked toward the door every few seconds, like expecting another ambush. The old man with the milky I stood behind the bar. "We rebuild," he said, voice strong despite his frame. "And we make sure no one rides into this town thinking it belongs to them." Someone asked how. The stranger stood, slow and certain. "We train every man, woman, and child who wants it." "And if they don't want it?" someone asked. Clara stepped forward. "They will," she said, "because now they know what it costs not to." After the vote, the stranger saddled his horse. Clara watched from the edge of the barn. "You leaving?" He nodded. "For a while. You'll come back." He paused, hand on the reins. "I always do." She nodded once, then reached into her coat and pulled out a small stone. Carved into it was one word. "Stayed." She placed it on the fence post and stepped back. He didn't say anything, but he touched the brim of his hat, and rode into the dark. When morning came, Clara was already by the canyon again. She wasn't crying, wasn't waiting. She was working, hammering new planks for a lookout, using her good arm to guide the nails true. Her sling was off now, her arm stiff but steady. Behind her, the town stirred. Children gathered around an old table where rifles were being disassembled and cleaned. A woman stacked crates near the saloon wall. 2 boys dug a ditch for a new water line. And Clara looked out over the canyon, toward the place where the wind carried names. She didn't know when he'd return, but she knew this. The next time someone came for this town, they wouldn't find it kneeling. By the time spring came, the dust had changed color. Where there had once been smoke and char, now grew sage and stockgrass, soft and gold beneath the boots of those who stayed. The canyon no longer felt like a wound, just a place with echoes and memory, and names spoken gently when the wind allowed. Clara had taken to walking the edge at dusk, when the sky bled every color it knew. Her shoulder had healed, mostly. Her aim had improved. And the town, that town with no name and no church, now had both. They called it sanctuary, not because it was holy, but because enough people had bled for it that it had become sacred in its own way. The stranger came back in the 3rd week of April. No one saw him arrive. One moment the road was empty. The next there was a dust trail on the ridge, and a shape in a long coat, hat low, horse breathing hard. He rode into town like someone who belonged but never claimed it. Clara was at the well, drawing water. She didn't run to him, didn't wave. She just stood quiet. He tipped his hat. She nodded, and that was enough. They spoke by the chapel stones that night. The ruins had been cleared, and in their place was a wide wooden platform. Not a church exactly. Not yet, but a start. The moon lit the 2 of them in silver. The town behind them glowed with low lantern light and soft laughter. "Did you find what you were looking for?" she asked. "No." He paused. "But I found what I was running from." She looked down at her hands. Calloused now. Steady. Good trade. He looked at her then, long and quiet. "Best one I ever made." He stayed longer this time. Helped build the stables. Taught the boys how to fire without blinking. He even laughed once, a deep, rusty sound, like something unused finally catching air. At night, they sometimes walked the canyon together. No words, just wind and steps and the weight of knowing. Then one morning, without ceremony, he placed a package on the porch of her cabin. Inside a dress. Not flashy, not rich, but clean. Soft blue cotton, stitched with care. Real buttons. A waist that hadn't seen rags or rope. There was a note. For words. Live like a queen. She didn't cry. But when she stepped out wearing it later that evening, boots still on, hair still tied rough, every head in the square turned. Not because she looked delicate, but because she looked unbroken. She found him by the fence near the East Trail. "You think a dress makes someone royalty?" she asked. "No," he said, "but what you survived might." That summer, travelers began to pass through more often. Whispers spread about a town that took in the lost. A place with no sheriff, but no crime either. A place guarded not by laws, but by people who'd paid too high a price to ever lose their peace again. Sometimes the riders stayed. Sometimes they moved on. But all of them left with the same story. A woman who wore a rifle like a second spine, and a man who never gave his name. In late July, a gang rode in rough, loud, sure of themselves. They were gone before sundown. No shots fired. No blood spilled. Just silence. And a line of townsfolk standing in the street, rifles resting in the crook of their arms, Clara at the center. The stranger never had to lift his hand. By fall, the chapel was done. No preacher came. No cross raised. But people still came inside. To remember. To sit. To be still. Clara sometimes lit a candle in the back corner. No one knew who it was for. And no one asked. One morning, long after the leaves had gone dry and the canyon winds turned cold again, Clara woke to find a note on her porch, scrawled in that same rough hand. "You don't need me anymore. That's how I know you're ready." No name. No goodbye. Just dust on the trail. And one more stone placed gently near the chapel, carved not by her hand, but by his. Clara. She stayed. She didn't go after him, didn't call out, but she kept a note, slipped it inside the hem of that blue dress, tucked where only she would know. The years would pass. The town would change. People would come and go. But always, there'd be stories told by the fire about a girl once tied beside a goat shed, barefoot, beaten, silent, until a man took off his hat and said, "You'll live like a queen." And somehow she did. And if you rode into sanctuary late enough, with the wind just right, you might still hear her name whispered by the canyon walls, not in sorrow, but in the voice of someone who chose to stay. Like a queen, like a legend, like a woman no one could ever break again.